The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve is at its lowest level since 1983. Due to the recent elections, the President of the United States has continued to decrease the amount of oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve by selling it in order to get better prices at the fuel pumps for the United States so that elections would go better. Hard not to see it that way. So basically now the oil sales from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve have stopped, and we are kind of stuck now at 372 million barrels of oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is about half of its full capacity. That is significantly lower than any time, like I said, we've seen since when it was being filled in 1983. So we've stopped selling oil out of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but we have not begun refilling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This time, the U.S. Energy Secretary, who is a woman, and this is important because that's apparently her only qualification for the job. She's never worked in petroleum or chemicals or anything like that. She's just a woman who was elected to different offices, and now she's the Energy Secretary. She said it would be difficult to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve this year. It sounds like, this administration sounds like a child that has taken apart a toy, and it's going to be difficult to put it back together again. You kind of want to ask the question, well, you probably should have thought of that before you took it apart, Everyone could have told you that you're emptying out the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at a rapid clip. Yeah, it is going to be difficult to refill the thing. That's why you don't empty it in the first place, especially when you have a proxy war going on in Europe, a potential proxy war right at your doorstep over in Taiwan. When you see global conflict is literally staring you in the face, it's probably not the best time to lower your stockpiles of emergency supplies. But we're going to be talking about why it's so important for us to have an emergency supply of oil in the United States, because some of you are going to remember back just a few years ago to when we were energy self-sufficient, right? And you're going to go, well, why do we need to have all that oil stockpiled if we produce so much oil? Now, I've talked about this in passing here and there, but we're going to kind of go through some of the numbers of why it's so important for us to have a Strategic Petroleum Reserve of heavy, sour oil. Because the United States doesn't produce heavy, sour oil. Most of the United States oil that's produced is light and sweet. And you say, what does that have to do with anything? Okay, so just the fact that I'm pointing out that there's different kinds of oil out there, and different kinds of oil go into different kinds of refineries. Now, the United States refineries are by and large set up to process heavy, sour oil. But then with all the fracking going on across the United States, which is fantastic and awesome, we're mostly producing light and sweet oil. So what's happening is we're producing all this light and sweet oil, and then we're exporting that to China. That's basically what's happening. And then we are needing heavy sour so that we can produce the gasoline, the diesel for your car. So the oil coming out of the ground because of fracking in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, even in Texas, is not really going into your car. It's going into Chinese cars over on the other side of the planet. It's going elsewhere. Whereas the heavy crude oil that's the heavy sour oil that's coming out of the Middle East is still coming to the United States. We're processing it and turning it into the gas and diesel that you use. Now, there's some places in the United States where we produce some heavy sour oil. Now, medium sour oil comes out of Alaska. So we've been pumping a lot of oil out of Alaska. That's been dropping off more and more over the years. California also produces, I know, ironic, right? California produces about 325,000 barrels per day of, and mostly heavy sour oil. Alaska does about 500,000 barrels per day That's kind of what's been at recently. It used to be much higher, but so those two places. Now, in Alaska, you can see Russia. I've heard this from a dependable, reliable source up there that from your front porch you can see Russia, right? So the oil in Prudhoe Bay basically can get down south two different ways. It can get on a ship and go right past Russia, or it can come down that very narrow pipeline, which how hard would it be for one cruise missile to kind of blow that thing to kablooey, right? And that is well within the striking range of Russia. So all of that oil is, in a conflict with Russia, would be cut off almost immediately. That oil is not going to be much help. Offshore California, is that going to be much help to us? Maybe not. But then you start looking at all the oil imports from the Middle East. We import approximately 8.5 million barrels per day of oil. Now, getting back to the title of what you saw up on the screen there, that we have 18 days of oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, where's that number come from? Basically, we use 19.89 million barrels of oil a day. You could round that off to 20 million barrels of oil a day. We have 372 million barrels of oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is the right kind of oil for our refineries to use. Roughly speaking, do the math out, and it comes out to 18 days. So we've cut ourselves down from 36 days down to 18 days worth of oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That assumes all oil stops being produced. We can't import any more at all, that the refineries keep using oil at the present rate. We would be looking at 18 days. Now, if we mobilize for war, will we use more oil or less oil? More oil, right? Military setting a whole bunch of ships out to sea, repositioning a bunch of ships, repositioning military assets within the United States, significant increase in training, stockpiles needing to be built up wherever we're having a mobilization, and then you can start seeing that increase in demand for oil products, kind of offsetting kind of whatever the United States produces oil-wise in the refineries and such like that. Now, will we be able to increase the refinery capacity in order to produce the diesel and the oh gosh, I forget what it's called. The stuff that the military uses that goes into, it's heavier than diesel and it's less flammable than diesel, that's used in warfare in U.S. tanks and stuff like that. But it's basically of that same kind of thing as kerosene and diesel. It's just a different formulation. But all of that would need to be produced by U.S. refineries, or we'd have to purchase it abroad from other countries' refineries. But as you can see there, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve plays a very important role. We can't just up the production in West Virginia and Pennsylvania and everything like that, produce more oil, and then just send it down to the refineries to be refined. There is a sense in which the refineries might be able to be retooled, but they're not set up. And when I say set up, I mean large facilities, buildings, and stuff like that, for them to be redesigned and retooled so that they can produce gasoline and diesel off of our light, sweet oil. It might be technologically possible, but that would take a significant overhaul of certain things, and that process of having those refineries down while they're being basically rebuilt would be a significant disruption to the gas and diesel out there. Now, the United States, when it originally set up the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, said we should stockpile oil, we should stockpile diesel, we should stockpile gasoline. But they looked into it and they basically said it's cheaper for us to stockpile oil, and there's enough refinery capacity inside the United States that we can produce the diesel and the gasoline that we need and the jet fuel, so therefore we don't need to stockpile these things. So basically, we don't really actually have a Strategic Petroleum Reserve of actually the end products that we need. We have the feedstock, so that we can put it into the refineries. Now, if we had a bunch of accidents that happened at refineries that shut down a bunch of refineries due to sabotage or foreign intervention, we would be in a world of hurt very, very quickly, because we don't have the stockpiles out there of those things. We must keep our refineries operating. We had a bit of a hiccup this winter when that winter storm came through around Christmas and took a bunch of refineries offline because it was just so stinking cold down south. And it took weeks for some of those refineries to get back into operation. One of the refineries in Denver, Colorado, it shut down, and then when they tried to restart it, there were other issues. There was some sabotage due to environmentalists, green people who don't like the refinery. They caused problems, set a fire, and that closed it again. And it is now, my understanding is it's back open again, but this is the type of thing, not only do we have to deal with enemies outside the country sabotaging things, we have to worry about morons inside the United States sabotaging things as well. So we got oil coming from California, we got heavy oil coming from Alaska. Those would be susceptible to interdiction. Oil coming from the Middle East, that would be susceptible to interdiction. If it's going around Africa, past South Africa is part of the BRICS. It's the S in BRICS, right? Egypt is, sort of on our side, but then you start seeing Saudi Arabia, Iran. Iran could shut down the Strait of Hormuz. That's been their go-to thing to do, and that would just really cause all sorts of problems in the oil community out there. The Houthis have attempted to take out the pipeline that goes across Saudi Arabia to bypass the Strait of Hormuz. And they've done rocket attacks, and they're getting weapons from Iran and from other countries that help them have long-range capacity to attack those pipelines. So we see that the oil situation in the world is relatively unstable, and much of the oil in the world comes from one country called Russia. And of course, they're kind of out of the international community. So do we need a strong Strategic Petroleum Reserve today, even though we produce a lot of oil? The answer is yes. In order for us to have diesel and gasoline and jet fuel, we need that type of oil stockpiled just in case we have disruptions to our supply chain. And those supplies can be very well disrupted very quickly based on what we can see in the world at large. All right, folks, if you found this video to be useful or helpful, you might want to check out another video from me right over here. I'll see you over there, or I'll see you later. Steve Poplar of the Poplar Report, out.